Seminar presentation is on eating disorders in Asian population. The Australian is in brackets because, as you'll see when I come to the research question, it will narrow the focus to Australian Asian populations. What is an eating disorder? So an eating disorder is defined as something that has a persistent disturbance of eating-related behaviour that results in the altered consumption of food, as well as an impairment to the physical health or psychosocial functioning of an individual, and that's from the DSM-5. So that's just a common body dysmorphic image. Previously, it was thought that eating disorders were limited to a particular culture, so that they were culture bound, and that it was an upper class female who lived in a Western culture, and this is no longer so, and it's estimated that about 4% of the Australian population is experiencing an eating disorder. Another question is, where is this happening? It's happening all over the world, in Western countries and in developing and Asian countries. You can see from this slide how big Asia is and how many different countries are involved in Asia. Asian cultures are experiencing a rise in eating disorders, although because of the diversity of countries and of cultures within Asia, an eating disorder manifests itself in different ways in each country and each culture. It's also worth noting that because of Asian immigration, many people or individuals that have been exposed to or raised in Asian cultures while living in a Western country still face many similar issues in relation to eating disorders than people living in Asian countries. At this point, it's worth giving a snapshot into the differences between Asian and Western cultures in terms of two of the key risk factors for eating disorders. The first is the internalization by individuals of the Western ideal of a skinny female figure. This has been repeatedly identified as a key risk factor for eating disorders. The second risk factor for many eating disorders is a concept of enmeshment, which is a very close family relationship or an extreme form of proximity in family interactions. But going back to the influence of Western culture, the rapid change experienced by many Asian nations means they're becoming more wealthy. This means the rate of westernization has increased, and the increased influence of Western food culture and also media. It has meant that an ideal body shape in Asian countries, which may have previously been a more curvy or a more athletic body shape for women, has been replaced or is being replaced by the Western ideal of the skinny female. Asian countries are no longer insulated from the influence of the Western media as they become more developed and more rich. Secondly, the orientation of the individual within both types of cultures is relevant. Western cultures value individuality and independence, but in comparison, Asian cultures value connectedness and are quite interdependent. This last trait may be the key in understanding eating disorders in Asians, as it closely mirrors the risk factor of enmeshment, which is an extreme form of closeness in family interactions. Previous studies into eating disorders in Asian countries have used a cohort of university students. They've also been questionnaire-based. This has enabled them to identify risk factors for eating disorders, and it also has produced an abundance of quantitative data. However, there is a gap which requires some qualitative data, also the use of clinical samples, and there is room for qualitative data in the Australian context, as the Australian studies to date have been quantitative in nature. Therefore, the research proposed is to prepare qualitative data through interviews, which would be presented in vignettes. This would enable a study of the lived experience of eating disorders for Asian Australian women and help to inform future treatment and diagnosis for Australian women who are suffering from an eating disorder. The research question proposed is, what is the influence of the Asian Family Unit on the development of eating disorders for Chinese Australian women in Australia? This may come into some difficulties in recruiting such a specialised sample, finding people who would be willing to share their experiences in this realm, given that one of a common Chinese trait is to save face or to be proud. Further, it would introduce the question of acculturation into causation or for eating disorders. The question being, are Chinese Australian women developing eating disorders because of factors in their Chinese culture and upbringing, or because of factors in their Western culture, and how much has their acculturation or assimilation into Australian Western culture impacted their eating disorder? However, all of this would come through in the qualitative nature of the research and could be explained thoroughly. Okay, thanks very much.